Let's bring in for more legal insights right now Hofstra law professor, our good friend James Sample, who is standing by for us. James, good to have you with us. James, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, there you are. Okay, if you can explain to our viewers the difference between a case being dismissed with and without prejudice quickly.
So the initial proposal here was to dismiss this case without prejudice, which would have given the Department of Justice and the Trump administration the opportunity to bring the case back again. And that was, in some senses, perceived to be a kind of keeping Mayor Adams on a leash. If a case is dismissed without prejudice, then that means that it can be brought again. If it's dismissed with prejudice, that's the end, full stop. And in this instance, as Marcia just indicated in the conversation with you, because it is now dismissed with prejudice, it's actually even more of a sort of complete win for Mayor Adams.
And let me ask you this. Judge Ho's hands essentially tied. Once the DOJ really stepped in, there was not much he could do. And I think this conclusion that we obviously was reached here a few moments ago was something that was kind of a foregone conclusion. Accurate?
I think that is accurate, Chris, and I think that, you know, he had limited discretion here to do anything other than what he really did do. And in fact, in a sense, he gave the Justice Department more than they even wanted, because I think that ultimately the dismissal without prejudice works to Mayor Adams' favor. I do disagree a little bit with one thing that Marcia said in the earlier portion of the discussion there, which is to say this case wasn't just about upgrades, right? It was also about hundreds of thousands of dollars in defrauding the city's campaign finance system. That is a significant thing that is not typical, right? You know, people may get upgraded on flights, they may get upgraded at hotels. Making the case just about that minimizes what is essentially defrauding if the allegations prove to be true, and obviously we'll never know now because the case won't be brought, but hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe millions of dollars from New York City taxpayers.
Yeah, the straw donors was definitely a key component. Marcia, you've got a question for James?
I guess my question would be this. There have been a lot of papers that were filed, amicus briefs, and opinions that were also filed by an outside counsel that Judge Ho had hired. And I wondered what role you think that any of those opinions had. On the one hand, the amicus brief said, do not dismiss the charges. On the other hand, the outside counsel that he had hired said dismiss everything and dismiss it with prejudice. So what role do you think all these things played in swaying the judge to make a decision?
Well, certainly the brief and the arguments made by Paul Clement, the outside counsel he referenced, carried significant weight with Judge Ho, and he comes down in a place very similar. As Chris said, you know, Judge Ho was essentially told by Paul Clement that he had the limited discretion that Chris referenced earlier. So that played a major role. I do think that the amicus briefs that said don't dismiss this case at all, even though Judge Ho ultimately went in a different direction, you know, we're reading this opinion quickly as we're sort of live, and it literally just came out. It's 78 pages long. But if you read the opinion carefully, there is a lot in this opinion that looks quite unfavorable for Mayor Adams. It's a decision that goes in his favor with respect to the result because Judge Ho's hands are tied. But I think it speaks, the Department of Justice does not come off looking very good here, particularly when Judge Ho cites, for example, repeatedly the Danielle Sassoon letter that says that basically the Department of Justice is being dishonest in representing how this deal came about.
Well, see, that leads me to another question, Jim, and that is this, that there were a lot of resignations as a result of the decision by the Justice Department, and there are also questions that were raised by the prosecutors threatening that there could be a superseding indictment with other charges. So does that actually give more ammunition to the mayor's opponents to attack him when he runs for re-election, if he runs?
That question, the answer is absolutely yes, it does. And I think that, you know, the Department of Justice, you know, the attorneys who resigned, the attorneys who threatened to resign, Danielle Sassoon and others, indicating that there was going to be yet another superseding indictment, that there was, in essence, additional evidence that the Department of Justice had put and the SDNY prosecutors had put together that wasn't part of the initial indictment, is to say that the Trump administration stepped in and dismissed this case just as, at least in the eyes of the prosecutors, the case was getting even stronger than it was initially.
All right, James, stay with us for just a second before we do leave our broadcast friends.